How ugly are things about to get in Toronto, a city known for its notoriously undramatic hockey reactions? And have the Jackets arrived? Are they still in transit? Plus, we'll empty the notebook with a few stray observations that we couldn't quite get to from last night's frozen frenzy. All that and more coming up on Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before, only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Good evening, and we thank you for being here. However it is you may be joining us today, whether you're on YouTube or listening somewhere in your car, exercising, wherever you may be. We appreciate it. Welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL Game Night your place to get a recap of all the night's action in the NHL during the regular season and the playoffs, whether that's one game or 16. We're always here with the latest for you. We are available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Alex Wiederspiel. He's Eddie Garcia, host of Locked On LA Kings, here on Locked On NHL Game Night, where you can get all the latest goals, saves, big moments, and stories from the night in the NHL with a big assist from our Locked On local experts. A nice stress-free night for Eddie and I after both of our favorite teams got wins during the frenzy and did not have to play today. Just one game to get to, and boy, are we going to get to it as the Columbus Blue Jackets blew out the Toronto Maple Leafs, and in some respects, maybe even, I think, might have ransacked the Toronto Maple Leafs. This one got ugly and ugly fast. Cole Sillinger scored his first of the season to open the scoring nearly 7 minutes into the first, assisted by Charlie Coyle, who had a really big night. He assisted on the second goal of the first period, Zach Werenski. Sammy Blais got a response goal for Toronto, probably not the guy you're looking for in that moment, but you get a little depth scoring from Sammy Blais, who scores his first of the year. Then Ivan Provorov, Cole Sillinger again, assisted by Charlie Coyle again, and Dante Fabro close out the scoring in the second period. It is 5-1 going into the third period, and the Jackets added one more for good measure, with Charlie Coyle getting his fourth assist of the night. And in my weird dynasty fantasy league that I'm in, I have Charlie Coyle, so I'm very happy about that. The Leafs would add two more goals in the final 4 minutes and 15 seconds of this one from John Tavares and one from Nicholas Robertson, who had a 2-point night, but those felt very much like consolation goals, Eddie. 6-3 the final score. A rough night for Toronto.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, you know, we had the frozen frenzy the night before. I guess this was the frozen calm with just the one game to talk about. But, and then we're going to talk a little bit later about maybe some of the pluses and minuses of the frozen frenzy. But I will say, when you have one game to watch, it's pretty cool to be able to just focus all your attention on a couple of teams. And I've seen bits and pieces of Columbus here and there, but to really sit down and watch them and see probably their best game of the year, it was very difficult not to be impressed. And the third line had a monster game for the Blue Jackets in this one. I mean, this is a good week for some third lines around the NHL. You mentioned it, Charlie Coyle, first ever 4-assist game. Cole Sillinger gets his first 2 goals of the season with an assist, and Matthew Olivier had a goal and 3 assists. These guys were everywhere. It was almost like they were single-handedly taking on the entire Toronto Maple Leafs team and winning decisively. So this was a clinic by the Columbus Blue Jackets, a clinic of attacking the net, taking advantage of neutral zone turnovers and just attacking. They didn't have a lot of shots necessarily in this game, but what they had was creating off turnovers, odd man rushes, getting defensemen jumping up into play, attack. And as they love to fire the cannon in Columbus, they put multiple cannonballs into the side of the Maple Leafs ship, and they sunk that thing pretty early in this one.
Eddie might be a professional broadcaster. That was a pretty good. That was smooth right there. And worth noting, by the way, you talk about defensemen coming up in the play. They've got one of the best in the NHL at doing that.
Yeah, they do.
Zach Werenski is among the very, very best in the NHL of defensemen, joining the rush and pinching and playing in the structure of the offense, and then also playing a little jazz as well. Zach Werenski has been it's kind of been an odyssey of a career for him, but you look at where Columbus has come and his patience choosing to stay with that franchise looks like it might actually pay off, with Columbus maybe coming out of the darkest days of their rebuild finally.
Yeah, I mean, look, they were a great story last year with the Johnny Gaudreau tragedy. We didn't know what to expect, but I think a lot of us are kind of bracing ourselves and ready to understand, them having a very tough year. And they did a lot of great things. I mean, I thought they were going to make the playoffs after they won the game at Ohio Stadium against Detroit. They were on a high, and they're like, man, this team is just, what an amazing story. And then it just, unfortunately, the wheels kind of fell off. They had a late push to try and get into the playoffs and came up a little bit short. But now that's, with all due respect, they've put that behind them. They're moving on. And there's a lot of talent here. And frankly, other than Zach Werenski, some of their high-end talents, Dmitry Voronkov, Kirill Marchenko, they each had 1 point, didn't score a goal in this one. So this wasn't even the Blue Jackets with all of their, I'm going back to it, all of their cannons firing in this one. But the ones that did were very, very impressive. And I know we'll get to the Leafs a little bit later, but this was about Columbus putting on a show. And I doubt they think about this, but this was the only game of the night. So if you're a hockey fan and you want to watch hockey, you're tuning into this and you get to see Columbus putting on a show. All eyes were on them in the hockey world tonight, and they certainly did that.
Yeah. Also, I will say, I didn't believe he would have this kind of an impact when he was hired, but I'm a huge Dean Evison fan. If you go back and watch, he did something very similar with the Minnesota Wild his first year. Expectations there for Minnesota were very, very low after Dean Evison took over. And in that first year, he had them playing a fast, exciting brand of hockey. And again, I don't know if this is a guy who is going to be able to take Columbus in and say, win a playoff series, right? Like, we don't know if he's that kind of a tactician. You have to be among the very best coaches in the NHL to win those series, because that's the time where coaches actually earn the dollars that they get. Most of the time during the regular season, most coaches will tell you, yep, just send the next guy over, Most of the work that we do is in practice, or most of the work that we do is in training camp. But during the playoffs, every little decision matters, because everything is put under a microscope for those coaches. But right now, what Dean Evison is doing is really, really working for Columbus. I'm going to pose a question to you that we'll answer after we hear from our Locked on Columbus host in just a moment. But I want to pose it to you now to give you a chance to really think about this. And the question is, has Columbus arrived, or are they still in transit? We'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, let's get the final word on the game itself from Locked on Blue Jackets, Jay Forster.
So that was fun, huh? Blue Jackets beat the Toronto Maple Leafs 6-3. Got a little hairy at the end, like at the last 4 minutes or so, but Blue Jackets held on. They got the win. Third line is the story of the game, right? Charlie Coyle, 4 assists. Mathieu Olivier, a goal and 3 assists. Cole Sillinger, 2 goals and an assist. That line was absolutely unbelievable tonight, and it showed. And they did all that with basically under 15 minutes of ice time as well. 3 goals from defensemen, which is nothing to be laughed at. Dante Fabre's first of the season. Ivan Provorov gets another, increasing the number of goals scored by Russians on this team, despite the fact that they only make up about 20% of the team. They're scoring about 40% of the goals right now, which is awesome. 2.0 for Zach Werenski. Elvis makes 35 saves. Not the cleanest game in the world, but it was a really, really fun one. And sometimes fun is exactly what you want from a game. We'll discuss on tomorrow's Locked on Blue Jackets.
I get the feeling Jay is a glass is half empty kind of a guy, because it did not get interesting in the end. That game was all Columbus. A couple of garbage goals by Toronto at the end. That game never got interesting. It was over Jay, it was over. Come on now.
Yeah.
The referee had counted out Toronto. There was no threat of a comeback in this one at all.
I think in the data world, they would call what Toronto did in the last 4 minutes, they'd call that noise. Like, they wouldn't actually consider it meaningful data. That's like a 12-0 team in modern college football losing in a conference championship game with nothing to play for. It just doesn't matter. Like that game was done. It was cooked. But so the question is, Eddie, before we go to break, has Columbus arrived or are they still in transit?
I think they're still in transit at this point, because of kind of what I talked about last season. I mean, it looked like, and I know last season there was a lot going on, so I totally take that into consideration. But I'm not gonna believe it until I see it with Columbus, and I think that's fair. But I think there's reason to be optimistic. I think there's a lot to be excited about. I think that they deserve of having some expectations on them, but I need to see them when it matters most deliver. And that is obviously later in the season. So I think for now, I would still consider them in transit, but they have a chance to show later in the season that they have arrived.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. The one thing I want to note here, so Cole Sillinger with a really strong night, obviously, and I had been really wondering about what his role was going to look like in Columbus after they acquired Charlie Coyle, and certainly the trade request, whatever we're calling it, from Igor Chinnikov that was not really honored, has kind of helped this a little bit. But I do wonder if Cole Sillinger, who was one of the earliest pieces of Columbus's rebuild, if he could potentially be the sacrificial lamb if Columbus is good enough. If they're really good and they're on the trade market, I don't think Columbus is going to be looking for a rental. They've got cap space. They've got really good young core. They could be like the Devils a few seasons ago when they acquired Timo Meier. If a player like that comes on the trade market, I wonder if that possibility, if Sillinger, who was off to a really slow start this season, just 2 assists through 9 games, no goals, I wonder if he might be the sacrificial lamb. I will be watching that storyline to see if Sillinger can establish himself once and for all as a legitimate member of Columbus's core, much like he looked tonight, or if he's going to wind up being a trade chip for them on the road to bigger and better. I don't know that we will have an answer to that for a while, though.
By the way, my funny Cole Sillinger story of the night. My wife was watching the game with me. She's not a huge hockey fan, and when they said he scored a goal, she looked at me and said, "Cold cylinder." I said, "No, Cole Sillinger." But now, whenever I hear his name, I will think Cold Cylinder.
All right, I'm glad to know that significant others do. My girlfriend, we've been together for 8 years, whatever you want to call her. I'll eventually have to put a ring on it. I think I'm expecting comments in the YouTube. How I haven't you put a ring on it yet? We just celebrated 8 years. She does the exact same thing though. Philip Hedl, she is referred to for the entirety of our relationship because quite literally he was drafted, I think, 3 months before we started dating. So like she saw him from essentially the beginning, but she would refer to him as Flip Cheeto every time he would score a goal. Flip Cheeto. So I think this might just be a significant other thing for big hockey fans. I don't know. On that note, Cold Sillinger with a couple of goals in this one. We will have a much deeper dive into the misery in Toronto, which admittedly I think the Blue Jays could probably absolve them of if they play well enough. But the misery over the Maple Leafs, that's all coming up here on Locked On NHL Game Night. But first, before we get any deeper into the show, hockey season's officially here, right? And nothing beats being in the actual arena for those opening games. But let's be real, getting tickets, sometimes it's a headache between waiting in queues and surprise fees and prices that jump right before checkout. It's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. That's where Game Time comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NHL tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. I love that what you see is what you pay. There are no hidden fees at checkout. Their zone deals are total game changers. You pick the section, Game Time picks your seats, and you save big. You can even find some tickets for under $25. Good for those of us on a budget, especially if you have to travel. I live in West Virginia. If I want to see the Rangers go play the Blue Jackets, these exciting young Blue Jackets, I'm going to have to drive 3 hours to go there. It's gas money. I'm going to have to eat. I'm going to have to get a dog sitter for my dogs. But you know what? If I'm spending only $25 for tickets, I guess it all comes out in the wash. Take the guesswork out of buying NHL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Okay, so we're back, and what a mess for the Toronto Maple Leafs, who were out of town. There were some positives tonight in terms of the chances generated, but I think the bigger concern is the chances given up, Eddie. Whoa. Toronto, I think there's an argument to make that they looked a little slow. I'm going to borrow your word again because I'm loving this description of teams that look just like a little slow and unsure. Scuffling. We've said it about Dallas. We've said it about St. Louis. I think scuffling works for Toronto right now, and that lack of speed was apparent tonight with the way Columbus played off the rush.
Yeah, and to me it was just, again, Columbus attacking the net, and Toronto outshot Columbus 37-24. But as is the case most of the time, it's really about the quality chances, the dangerous scoring areas, more than it is just throwing it on the net. Goaltenders in this league are too good, to just be beaten because you put a high volume number of shots on net. And the Blue Jackets, despite, having 13 fewer shots, had the more quality chances. They had the odd man rushes. They had, as we said, defensemen jumping up in the play. And Toronto didn't have much of that at all. And again, a couple of garbage goals. Like it was 6-1, and that was really what the game was. And it was obvious they were going to miss Mitch Marner, and they didn't do much to replace him. So there's that. And if you're a Leafs fan, you could say, hey, William Nylander didn't play in this game. He's dealing with something, right? He left the game a couple of games ago. He did play the last game, and now he's back out again. So there's something going on there, and he didn't play, and that's obviously significant. And you had Caden Primo in net. We'll see if Joseph Woll comes back here pretty soon. He's on his way back after having the personal issues. So this is not necessarily, the full strength of the Toronto Maple Leafs that we could see. But the issues in this game were bigger than any of that. It wasn't about Caden Primo. It wasn't that William Nylander didn't play in this game. It was turnovers in their own zone, and it was not being able to defend their net properly. Look, after the first goal of the game, Craig Berube called timeout. He knew his team wasn't ready to play. And, in hockey, I love in hockey you get one. I really do. And he decided, and I have no issue with this. If you're the coach and you know your team, him calling it at that point, but it does speak volumes as to what this team was doing to that point and how he felt they weren't doing what was necessary. So when your coach calls a timeout when it's 1-0, that is a message. And they didn't really receive it. They did a little bit better in the start of the second period, but it wasn't nearly enough. And I think that they're probably thinking that there's another team in Toronto right now that's stealing all the headlines, because right now, this is not going to be page one in the Toronto newspapers tomorrow. So maybe they get a little bit of a relief from that. But yeah, this was a really poor effort by Toronto. The only highlight was John Tavares getting his 500th career goal. So that was cool. 49th player in NHL history to do that. But there are some issues. There is some scuffling, and Toronto now 5-5-1 on the season after that game.
I sent you a tweet. So one of my favorite analytics guys is Mike Kelly of NHL Network, and he had a tweet after the Blue Jackets went up 5-1. And I think this is just perfectly encapsulating where Toronto is right now, that the Leafs have allowed a league-leading 14 goals off the rush this season. Now, listen, some of that could be goaltending. It's entirely possible that you got a big goalie in Stolarz, right? And maybe the speed has something to do with it. But realistically, we've seen this with teams in the past, that as they start to age a little bit, which Toronto has, there sometimes comes with it an issue of having a harder time defending the rush. And we know that the game is faster than ever right now. Forwards are faster than ever. Defensemen are skating. I mean, Cale Makar, Zach Werenski, Quinn Hughes. Not every team has one of those, but it's enough that I just mentioned 3 of them off the top of my head. These guys can flat out move. And the thing we know about Toronto is they actually don't have a player like that. So for a Leafs team that has gotten to the playoffs now, what are we on? 6, 7, 8 straight years of them getting into the playoffs and only winning 2 playoff rounds. They're doing it without a player like that. You know, there's going to be some susceptibility to that speed. So that, I think, is worrying. I expect that if Toronto is anywhere, like as long as they're not completely out of the race, which I don't expect them to be, the parity in the East looks absolutely bonkers right now. But as long as they're not out of the race, I expect Toronto is probably going to be one of these teams in the market for a trade, because you just, if you're the Maple Leafs, you cannot afford to waste any more of this Matthews Nylander era. So if you need speed, you're going to have to go get speed.
Yeah, and Matthias Michelli, he has some abilities, but he clearly isn't the answer. He's a a supplemental type player. He's not somebody that can be. He's a supporting role player. I think he's not somebody who's going to be one of the stars of your team. They hope Matthew Knies can turn into that. Maybe. I don't know if he's ready for that quite yet. I think he can be a very good player for them, but maybe in hindsight, I know a lot of Maple Leafs fans were not disappointed to see Mitch Marner leave, and I get where they're coming from on that. But at the same time, like I said, it's hard to lose a player like that and think that somehow you're not going to miss him and that you can get by with other pieces supplementing other players. So more pressure on Austin Matthews, obviously more pressure on William Nylander, John Tavares as well. Those guys are going to have to take it up another notch. And so far they haven't. I don't know that you could say that they've done that so far.
I feel like in my head, I can hear Brad Pitt and Moneyball saying, well, we can't replace Marner, but we're going to recreate him in the aggregate, which is what it felt like they did with the players they brought in, but only offensively. People forget Marner, if Marner was a center instead of a winger, he'd probably be a consistent Selke candidate because of the way he plays defense in the regular season. He's one of the best defensive wingers on top of being an outstanding everything else on the offensive side. He just doesn't play center, so we don't really think about that. Like if Mark Stone can't win the Selke as a winger, probably no winger is ever going to do it in the modern NHL. You have to play center to do it. But why don't we give the final word on this one to David Morisuti of Locked On Maple Leafs?
3 to the Columbus Blue Jackets. I'm David Morisuti from the Locked On Leafs podcast, and it was just not a good night overall for the Leafs as they lost once again to the Blue Jackets, who seem to have their number lately, especially in Columbus. After winning last night, you think they'd be able to take some of the momentum, but it was not going to happen. Columbus was on them right from the jump. They took a 2-0 lead. Regroup in the intermission. It did not happen. They did make the score 2-1, Sammy Blais getting his first goal of the season since joining the Leafs, but Columbus poured it on. They had a big period themselves. At one point, it was 6-1 in this game. The Leafs just did not have really much going. Caden Primo had a tough night in net. Steven Lorentz also got hurt, but John Tavares did score his 500th goal. We'll discuss all that on the next edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so we'll go ahead and put a pin in the Toronto Maple Leafs talk for the sake of the other 30 fan bases who don't want to hear about it. In fact, we're going to see if we can put the other 30 fan bases in the spotlight, because the Frozen Frenzy produced an insane amount of hockey last night and a whole ton of takes that we couldn't get to as a result. So we're going to empty the notebook next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. We're back in just a moment. He's Eddie Garcia. I'm Alex Wiederspiel. This is Locked On NHL Game Night. I don't know what they call like Boxing Day is the day after Christmas. I don't know what we're supposed to call the day after the Frozen Frenzy, but it is the day after the Frozen Frenzy, and there's sort of a come down here. And I actually, to be honest with you, I agree 100% with you, Eddie, that this was needed. 16 games was a lot. And I think the thing I took away more than anything else, and we did not talk about this last night at all on air. You and I talked about this off air, but I just, there's a part of me that wishes it was a little more spread out last night. I loved the amount of hockey I was able to watch, right? Amazing. But I thought, especially with those early games, the quality of watching is tough. And I will say the multi-view aspect with hockey is a little harder to follow because of how small the puck is. So there's a part of me that thinks maybe it would have been better. Certainly 4 games at once is tough. 3 at once is pretty hard, but maybe one of those happens to be the Frozen Frenzy hub where Buchagras and Kevin Weeks were. But 2 is maybe ideal if we're going to go multi-view. And I'm wondering if maybe the goal should be, if we space this out a little bit, can we get it to a point where there's always 2 games on, but maybe never more than 2 games on? That's my thought. Like, great product, but it could use some tweaking.
Yeah, and we talked about it a little bit yesterday on the air. It's a great festival of hockey, right? And if you love the game, it's a fun day, but it is a lot. And you and I were paid yesterday to try and watch and consume as much as we could, and it was too much. At times it was too much. We couldn't literally, even with multiple computer screens and a TV here in my office, / recording studio, you can't consume all of it properly. So I would prefer that the NHL, and I know it's easy for me to say this, I'm sure it's very difficult to find a day where this can all be done on the same day. There are arenas that have others, professional teams that share time with them. There are concerts in those venues, all that kind of stuff. I get that. But ideally, this needs to be something during the off season of both baseball and football. And it needs to be on a weekend, and it needs to start at 11 a.m. Eastern time or something and go all the way to 8 p.m. Pacific time. It needs to be something like that. I understand right now they probably don't want to have it on the weekend because of football. I get that. And they did go up against the World Series on the Frozen Frenzy. So you have to try and find the right place on the calendar to do it. And I don't know that this was the right place for it. Like I said, it's just so much. It's fun. It's like I said, a celebration of the sport, all that. It is that. But I would love to know why they can't do this, like I said, on a weekend to space it out more, and while there's no football or baseball going on.
I also wonder how much of this is because they want to do it early in the season when everybody is still very much mathematically alive. Because, one of the stats that I love, and I mentioned it yesterday, it was either yesterday or 2 days ago on the show, that, Elliot Friedman and the Sportsnet guys had done some research on this, and that if you're more than 4 points out, which, by the way, nobody in the Eastern Conference currently is, but there are a few teams in the West, if you're more than 4 points out by November 1st, your playoff chances drop to 12%, basically a 1 in 10 chance of making the playoffs because of how hard it is to make up a 4-point deficit over the course of 6 more months of hockey. And the thing that I guess I get is that if you want to do it earlier when everybody is still mathematically alive and teams are still playing each other out, there's more intrigue. I guess I can understand that, but I wonder if maybe this is something that needs to tie into like a Canadian Thanksgiving type of day. The only issue there, of course, being that it's a Monday, and so they might have to go up against Monday Night Football for some of the late games. So I think there are some challenges here that they're going to have to address, but I get why they do it early, but like in terms of the time of year, but I also think you're right on that then there are all these football challenges that come with it. And I don't know how much I want to be up watching I should say this, me, if I wasn't being paid to do this, how much I'd want to be up watching LA San Jose at 11. Whereas to your point, if that game starts at 8 Eastern Standard Time, or even 8:30, I think you would get some eyeballs for Macklin Celebrini. I think there are enough hockey fans who have heard about what he has been doing and say, you know what, kind of interested in what this Macklin Celebrini guy has got going on, and they would have seen a pretty good performance from him.
Yeah, and another thing, I know the first week, because we were doing this show, there was some interesting scheduling where there was one day there was no games, and then there was another day where there was one game, and it's like, can we not spread this out a little bit so we have at least a little bit of a meal every day, and instead of, I did appreciate, as I said, getting to watch Columbus a full game, sit down and just focus on them and learning about them. That's cool. But it can be more than one, depending on the time zone you live in, right? You could see at least 3 games, that you could just sit down and kind of watch. So it's difficult when you've got a day where there's just a ton of games and you just can't watch it all, even if you want to. And then the next day you're just getting 1, or 2, and you were like, okay, now I actually like a little bit more. So the NHL schedule can be a bit challenging at times.
It's a little surprising, too, that it was on a Wednesday, which typically has been a night that I feel like they have been trying to reclaim, because obviously that has been, in American hockey history, that has been a night that has done very, very well in the pre-lockout days. That was hockey night and on ESPN. So I am a little surprised by that. That's a night where they've been trying to do some premium games. They only did 1 tonight. So a little strange, but folks, if you want complete coverage of your favorite NHL team, I've got good news for you. There is a Locked On NHL Team podcast and YouTube show for you, because we have one for every NHL team except for the Calgary Flames, which we are currently working on and will hopefully have resolved soon. This show, Locked On NHL Game Night, is going to be here for you each and every night of the regular season and playoffs, wrapping up the night in the NHL. So don't forget to like and subscribe to this show if you're watching on YouTube, which we appreciate. We want you to see, we want to see your thoughts on tonight's games. And we also want to hear your thoughts on the Frozen Frenzy. Are there things that can be done better? Do you want to watch other teams on a night like that other than your favorite team? And if so, what can be done to make that easier? That'll do it for this episode of Locked On NHL Game Night. He's Eddie Garcia. I'm Alex Wiederspiel. Thanks for listening and for watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.